Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard. Today I turn the camera over to you, the Hollywood Graveyard community, as we travel the world to visit famous and historical graves in your neck of the woods. Together we'll cross the country and eventually the oceans to pay our respects to legends around the globe, like Selena, Jayne Mansfield, Ava Gardner, and many more. My friends, the time is yours. When I announced in January that we would open up video submissions to you, the viewer, to commemorate 2 years of Hollywood Graveyard, I wasn't sure what to expect. Well, my friends, you came through in spades. We've received so many submissions from all over the world that we're going to have to break up our viewer special into not just 2 parts, but 3, maybe even 4, depending on how many more submissions we get. From Arkansas to Australia, London to Long Island, we're going to cover more ground in the next month together than I could in a decade on my own. In this series, we'll go beyond the limits of Hollywood not just geographically, but figuratively as well, visiting not only Hollywood stars, but athletes, historical figures, social reformers, entrepreneurs, and more. Our journey around the world will unfold in no particular order, simply based on the order videos were received and grouped by state and country. If you've submitted a video and don't see it here, look for it in one of the later parts. And for those who would still like to submit, don't worry, as long as your video makes it to us before the March 30th deadline, when we begin putting the final parts together, your video will be considered. We'll kick off this adventure in the great state of Kentucky, at Mount Tabor Methodist Church, to visit the final resting place of a man considered one of the fathers of Hollywood, a true filmmaking pioneer, D.W. Griffith. He shot the very first movie of any length filmed in Hollywood, the 1910 silent short, In Old California. During the silent era, he innovated filmmaking techniques like close-ups and fade transitions. His best-known work was the silent film The Birth of a Nation in 1915, a film both revered and reviled today. Revered for its pioneering and innovative filmmaking techniques, setting the stage for the modern feature-length film, but also condemned for its blatant racism. His next film, Intolerance, was a grand epic, made partly in response to this criticism. Intolerance was one of the first films selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. And if you've ever shopped in the Hollywood and Highland Mall, where the Hollywood Walk of Fame is located, you'll be curious to know it is a replica of the set of Intolerance. Griffith is also credited for helping make stars of actresses like Lillian and Dorothy Gish and Mary Pickford. And in 1919, he was one of the co-founders of United Artists, and a decade later, a co-founder of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 73. To Texas now, and Glenwood Cemetery in Houston. In Section E1, near the large Lee Monument, is Jean Tierney, a leading lady of Hollywood in the 40s and 50s. Some of her best-known films include Heaven Can Wait and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. But fans of classic Hollywood will always remember her as an enigmatic murder victim, the title character in the noir thriller Laura in 1944.
What are you trying to do? Force a confession out of me?
You've been holding out, and I want to know why. It'll be easier for you if you tell the truth.
What difference does it make what I say? You've made up your mind I'm guilty.
She was nominated for an Oscar for her role in Leave Her to Heaven. A longtime smoker, Jean died of emphysema at the age of 70. In this same cemetery, in Oakdale section, is legendary aviator and filmmaker Howard Hughes, known during his life as one of the richest men in the world. He began producing films in the 20s and 30s, with hits including Hell's Angels and Scarface. Around this time, he pursued another of his passions, aviation, setting multiple airspeed records, including his 1938 record flight around the world in just 91 hours. His work in aviation science earned him a special Congressional Gold Medal. He became famously reclusive later in life and died of kidney failure at the age of 70. A biopic was made about his life, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Hughes. Southwest of Houston, along the coast at Corpus Christi, is Seaside Memorial Park, where we find the final resting place of the queen of Tejano music, Selena. She began singing at a young age, and by the early 90s had become a major force in Latin music, the best-selling Latin artist of the 90s. She's credited for helping popularize Tejano music with mainstream audiences, winning a Grammy for her Selena Live album. In 1995, she began working on her crossover album, Dreaming of You, which would debut atop the Billboard 200 list.
'Cause I'm dreaming of you tonight.
Selena would not live to see the album's success. She was shot and killed by her own fan club president in March of 1995. She was just 23. Some 30 to 40,000 fans paid their respects at her funeral before she was laid to rest here. A biopic was made about the life of Selena in 1997, starring a then little-known actress named Jennifer Lopez. North now to Dallas, Texas. At Sparkman Hillcrest Memorial Park, we find the grave of Greer Garson. She was a British-American actress popular during the Second World War, one of the top box office draws in the 40s. Much of her best-known work was with MGM, where she received 7 Academy Award nominations, winning for the 1942 film Mrs. Miniver, the role for which she is best known. She's also remembered as Elizabeth to Laurence Olivier's Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. She retired to a ranch in New Mexico and lived to the age of 91. Making our way now to the mausoleum at Sparkman Hillcrest, we find the crypt of William Hootkins. You may not recognize his name, but he was a familiar face in some of the biggest films in the 70s to the 90s. He played Porkins in the original Star Wars, the first rebel to die while attacking the Death Star. He can also be seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark and Batman. And on stage, he played Alfred Hitchcock in the play Hitchcock Blonde at the Royal Court Theatre. He died of cancer at the age of 57. In this same mausoleum, St. Matthew section, is Hall of Fame baseball player Mickey Mantle. He was a center fielder and first baseman who played his entire career for the New York Yankees. Today he's considered one of the greatest switch hitters and overall players in the history of the sport. Among his career highlights and awards are 7 World Series, 3 MVPs, a Triple Crown, and Golden Glove Award. He announced his retirement in 1969 after 18 seasons. He died in 1995 at the age of 63. We leave the Lone Star State and enter the Peach State, Georgia, and Our Lady of Perpetual Help Catholic Church in Carrollton. Near the church is the final resting place of Susan Hayward, another of Hollywood's favorite leading ladies of the 40s and 50s. She's best known for her film roles like I'll Cry Tomorrow and as a condemned murderess in I Want to Live. Her performance is considered one of the all-time greats and earned her an Oscar.
Well, we might as well face it, I'm in a real jam this time. I'm the little ball bouncing around a roulette wheel. Everyone betting me the land where it's going to do them the most good. Votes for the DA, circulation for the newspapers, promotions for the cops.
That still don't give them the right to hang a bad rap on you.
You didn't ask me if it was a bad one.
In 1956, while filming the Howard Hughes film The Conqueror in Utah, in an area that had once been an atomic test site, she and the rest of the cast and crew, including John Wayne and Agnes Moorehead, were potentially exposed to dangerous levels of radioactivity. Susan was diagnosed with brain cancer in 1973 and died 2 years later at the age of 57. Over the years, close to 100 people associated with the Conqueror film shoot, including the director Dick Powell, developed some form of cancer or died of cancer-related illness. A correlation has never been proven, but the issue remains a scandal in Hollywood history. In Dallas, Georgia, and Dallas Memory Gardens, we find Ray Traylor, better known as Big Boss Man. He was a pro wrestler, remembered for appearances in the WWF and WCW in the 80s and 90s. During that time, he held the WWF Hardcore title 4 times, as well as Tag Team Championship with Ken Shamrock. He died of a heart attack at just 41 and was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. Let's head to Illinois now and Cedarville Cemetery. If we follow the signs, we reach the final resting place of social reformer Jane Addams, known as the Mother of Social Work. She created one of the nation's first settlement houses, Hull House in Chicago in 1889, which served to bridge the rich and poor through the sharing of knowledge and culture and help alleviate poverty. Addams was also co-founder of the ACLU, whose mission it is to preserve the individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. In 1931, Jane Addams was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, focusing on women's rights and the concerns of mothers, children, and local public health. She was a role model for middle-class women who volunteered to uplift their communities. She died in 1935 at the age of 74. The Windy City is our next stop, Chicago, Illinois. Here in the mausoleum at Rose Hill Cemetery is the crypt of John Shedd, one of Chicago's major philanthropists, contributing to charities, universities, and museums. In the 1920s, he provided the money to build Chicago's Shedd Aquarium, one of the world's largest aquariums. Also in Chicago is St. Mary, a Catholic cemetery. In section AM, we find the grave of Brian Piccolo. He played football for the Chicago Bears from 1965 to 1969. He died at the age of 26 from cancer, and his story inspired the 1971 TV movie, Brian's Song, starring James Caan as Piccolo. We now hop over a couple of the Great Lakes east to Pennsylvania. In Springfield is Saints Peter and Paul Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery, where we find acting giant Matt McGrory. He held the Guinness World Record for tallest actor, standing at 7.5 feet tall. He made appearances on The Howard Stern Show, and on film can be seen in Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, as well as in Tim Burton's Big Fish as the lovable giant, Carl. He died of heart failure at the age of 32. Not far from here is Mount Sharon, a Jewish cemetery, where we find funny man David Brenner. He started his career as a producer of documentary films before switching to comedy in 1969. A pioneer of observational comedy, he would become well known for his frequent appearances on The Johnny Carson Show, a staggering 158 appearances, more than any other guest. On TV, he was cast to star in the 1976 sitcom Snip, based off the movie Shampoo, but the show was shelved before it ever hit the airwaves. Among his final television appearances include a turn as himself on Modern Family. Brenner died of cancer at the age of 78. His humor showcased right here on his tombstone. Northwest of here is Fraser, Pennsylvania. Here at Haim Solomon Memorial Park is Jim Croce. He was a folk and rock musician in the 70s, a voice for America's working class, whose hits include Big Bad Leroy Brown and Time in a Bottle.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do.
In 1973, Croce was killed in a plane crash in Louisiana at the age of 30. In 1990, he was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Further north is Berwick, Pennsylvania. At St. Cyril and Methodius Cemetery, we find the grave of the rebel, Nick Addams. He was a film and television actor, best remembered as ex-Confederate officer Johnny Yuma in the TV series The Rebel from 1959 to 1961. He also had a number of notable film roles, including his Oscar-nominated performance in the 1963 film Twilight of Honor. Addams was good friends with James Dean, and after Dean's death in 1955, Addams dubbed some of James Dean's final lines in the film Giant. Nick Addams too met an untimely death, a drug overdose at the age of 36. Fairview Cemetery in Pen Argyl is our next Pennsylvania stop. This is where we find the final resting place of blonde bombshell Jayne Mansfield. If you saw our tour of Hollywood Forever, you'll recall part 3 when we visited Jayne's cenotaph near the lake. This is her actual grave. Jayne was one of the leading sex symbols of the 50s and 60s, one of the very early Playboy playmates. She signed with 20th Century Fox in 1956, molded to be the successor to Marilyn Monroe. Her roles in The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter made her a star. Like many actresses of the era who played the dumb blonde, including Marilyn Monroe and Judy Holliday, Jayne was actually very intelligent in real life. But Jayne knew why audiences flocked to her, and she wasn't afraid to exploit her sexuality through publicity stunts and wardrobe malfunctions to further her career. In 1963, she became the first post-code mainstream Hollywood actress to appear nude in a film, Promises, Promises. Her life and career were cut tragically short when she died in a car crash en route to New Orleans from Biloxi. Because of the nature of the crash, in which the car went under the back of a truck, highway safety now requires all semi-trucks to be equipped with a bar to prevent rear crashes from going under the truck. It's known as a Mansfield bar. We leave Pennsylvania behind and travel to Oklahoma. Here in Oklahoma City is Memorial Park Cemetery, where Wiley Post is laid to rest. Known as the father of modern aviation, Wiley Post was the first pilot to fly solo around the world, a feat he accomplished in 1933 utilizing autopilot and a compass in place of a navigator. He's also known for his work to explore the limits of long-distance, high-altitude flying, developing pressure suits. In 1935, Post was flying in Alaska with friend and actor Will Rogers. Engine failure caused the plane to crash, killing both men instantly. Post was 36. In Tulsa, we find another cemetery which happens to be named Memorial Park Cemetery. In Section 15E is the unmistakable monument to Leon Russell. He was a multi-talented musician, performing in a variety of genres and collaborating with artists from Bob Dylan to Elton John. His epitaph is an allusion to one of his best-known songs, A Song for You.
And when my life is over, remember when we were together. Oh, we were alone and I was singing this song for you.
Russell was inducted into both the Rock and Roll and Songwriters Halls of Fame. Nearby in this same cemetery, not far from the lake, is the final resting place of another music legend, Roy Clark, famous country western singer and television star. He's remembered for hosting Hee Haw, a nationally televised country variety show from 1969 to 1997.
Welcome to Hee Haw, starring Buck Owens and Roy Clark.
More than just a host, Clark was renowned as a guitar, banjo, and fiddle player, with hits like Yesterday When I Was Young. He was a longtime member of the Grand Ole Opry and was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2009. He died in November 2018 at the age of 85. Also here at Memorial Park Cemetery, in Section 28, is Sam Kinison. He was a stand-up comedian whose routines were often punctuated by his distinctive scream. He actually began his career as a Pentecostal preacher, which would later heavily influence his comedy. He had a handful of film and TV roles, including in Back to School and as Al Bundy's angel in Married with Children. Sam was killed in 1992 while driving to a show in Nevada. A drunk driver crossed into his lane and hit them head-on. He was 38. This is Salisbury National Cemetery in Salisbury, North Carolina. Among the many war heroes laid to rest here is musician Red Prysock. He was a rhythm and blues saxophonist. He learned to play the sax in the Army during World War II, and in the 50s would play with artists like Tiny Bradshaw and Cootie Williams. He even led his own band, with the 1955 hit Hand Clappin'. Oakwood Cemetery is located in Siler City, North Carolina. In Section 2, we find the grave of Frances Bavier, known to fans of The Andy Griffith Show as Aunt Bee, a role she played from 1960 to 1968, then again in Mayberry RFD until 1971. The role earned her an Emmy. On Broadway, she could be seen in the play The Poor Nut, and on film she had a role in The Day the Earth Stood Still. She died of heart failure at the age of 86. There are pickles left here, a reference to an episode of The Andy Griffith Show.
And here's the surprise. Some of my new homemade pickles.
One of Hollywood's biggest stars and most legendary beauties is also laid to rest here in North Carolina. At Sunset Memorial Park in Smithfield, we find the grave of Ava Gardner. She rose to fame as an actress in the 1946 film The Killers, playing femme fatale Kitty Collins. She became a leading lady in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s with films like The Barefoot Contessa, The Night of the Iguana, and Mogambo, which earned her an Oscar nomination.
I don't know how you're going to solve this or what good's ever going to come of it. But whatever you do, Vic, I wish you all the happiness in the book.
Ava was romantically involved with some of Hollywood's leading men, like Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra. She spent the final years of her life in London in relative quiet, living to the age of 67. In Mount Airy, North Carolina, we now visit White Plains Baptist Church Cemetery, where Ang and Chang Bunker are buried. Have you ever wondered where the term Siamese twins comes from? Ang and Chang Bunker were the original Siamese twins. The brothers were born in Siam in 1811, conjoined at the chest with a shared liver. They began traveling the world, becoming quite the sensation, making money in sideshow exhibits and freak shows, including with P.T. Barnum, and thus the term Siamese twin was born. Despite being conjoined, the brothers both married and had children. In their later years, Chang fell into poor health, turning to alcohol. Early one morning, Ang awoke to find Chang dead next to him. Despite being in good health, Ang knew that he soon must follow. Hours later, he too was dead. The twins were 62. Crossing the border south, we reach South Carolina and St. Philip's Episcopal Church Cemetery in Charleston. The Holy Ghost may not be the only ghost found in this churchyard, where the ghost of Vice President John Calhoun has been rumored to wander. In this hallowed ground is the grave of actress Alicia Rhett. She was a painter and stage performer who is remembered today for her one and only film role, as India Wilkes in the 1939 film Gone with the Wind. She left Hollywood to return to South Carolina shortly after, where she would paint portraits and coach aspiring actors. She was one of the last surviving members of the cast of Gone with the Wind, living to be 98. In Greenville, South Carolina, we reach Woodlawn Memorial Park, and a baseball player known as Shoeless Joe Jackson. He was an outfielder for most of his career, playing for the Philadelphia Athletics, the Cleveland Indians, and the Chicago White Sox. Though a century has passed, he still has the third highest batting average in MLB history. His unusual nickname stems from a game in which he removed his shoes because of blisters from a new pair of cleats. Jackson was caught up in the 1919 Black Sox scandal, in which several members of the Chicago White Sox fixed to intentionally lose the series in exchange for money. Jackson proclaimed his innocence and was eventually acquitted. Still, the commissioner banned him for life from playing baseball at the height of his career. He died of a heart attack at the age of 64. Shoeless Joe has been portrayed in a number of films, including by Ray Liotta in Field of Dreams. The last state we'll reach in this first part of our tour made by you is Louisiana. We'll begin here at Garden of Memories in Metairie, Louisiana. In Section R, we find the grave of country rock artist Graham Parsons. He was a singer, songwriter, and guitarist known for his work with the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers. Despite a relatively short career, he ranked number 87 on Rolling Stone's list of 100 greatest artists of all time. Graham became enamored with Joshua Tree here in Southern California. He would spend a great deal of time there, partaking psychedelics and writing music. While staying at the Joshua Tree Inn in 1973, Parsons overdosed on morphine, passing away at the age of 26. Before his death, Parsons had expressed a desire to be cremated in the desert. However, Parsons' family arranged to have his body flown back to Louisiana for burial. To honor his final wishes, Parsons' friends actually stole his body from the airport and drove to Joshua Tree, where they attempted to cremate his body on site to release his soul in the desert he loved. They doused his coffin and body in gasoline and set it ablaze. What remained of his body was flown to Louisiana and interred here. A makeshift monument was created in Joshua Tree at the site of his cremation, later relocated to the Joshua Tree Inn, where fans of Parsons will often book Room 8, the room where he died. One of New Orleans' legendary cemeteries is Metairie Cemetery. Because of the high water table, New Orleans has the highest percentage of above-ground burials, around 90%. If caskets were interred in the ground, after heavy rain or flooding, they might just rise up and pop right back out. So many of the cemeteries you'll see here in New Orleans, including Metairie Cemetery, are filled with beautiful above-ground vaults and mausoleums. This tomb, watched over by Angel Gabriel playing a trumpet, belongs to legendary jazz and swing musician Louis Prima. He began playing trumpet in his own band as a teenager in New Orleans before moving to New York. His 1936 composition Sing 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 became one of the biggest and most covered hits of the era. He would go on to headline clubs in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and by the 40s was popularizing jump blues. Other of his big hits include Jump, Jive, and Wail.
Jump, jiving, then you will, you gotta jump, jiving, then you will.
And That Old Black Magic with Keely Smith.
In a spin, loving the spin I'm in, under the old black magic called love.
Later in his career, he was known for incorporating Italian elements into his music, such as the tarantella. And Disney fans will recognize him as King Louie in The Jungle Book.
I want to be like you.
In 1975, Prima underwent surgery to remove a brainstem tumor. He fell into a coma from which he never recovered, spending the last 3 years of his life comatose. He died at the age of 67. Entombed with Louie is his fifth wife, Gia Maione. After Keely Smith, Gia took over the role as singer in Prima's band and also became his wife. They performed together to sold-out crowds until his death, and she would work the rest of her life to promote his legacy. Not far from here is the final resting place of actress Marguerite Clark. She made her Broadway debut in 1900, and in the very early days of Hollywood became a lead performer with famous Players Lasky Corporation. Her diminutive stature belied her age, and like her contemporary Mary Pickford, she often played characters much younger than she really was. Among her films was the very first feature version of Snow White in 1916. The film inspired a young Walt Disney to make Snow White into his very first animated feature 20 years later. By 1920, she was one of silent film's biggest stars, but decided to retire after making Scrambled Wives in 1921. She died of pneumonia at the age of 57 and was entombed here with her husband. If you like your chicken with a little spice, you may be a fan of Popeyes. Here is the tomb of Al Copeland, the founder of Popeye's Chicken. Al began his career with a one-man donut shop, but later, inspired by the success of Kentucky Fried Chicken, founded Popeye's Chicken and Biscuits in 1976 and began franchising across the country. There are now over 2,600 locations around the world. Copeland died of cancer at the age of 64. Next on our tour of Metairie, we find the Rice Family Mausoleum, where Stan Rice is entombed. He was an author, poet, and artist. His 1976 poetry collection, White Boy, earned him the Edgar Allan Poe Award from the Academy of American Poets. He also has paintings in various museums in Louisiana. He was married to author Anne Rice, of Interview with a Vampire fame. In section 146, we find another legendary baseball player, Mel Ott. He played right field for the New York Giants from 1926 to 1947. He was an all-star for 11 consecutive seasons and was the first National League player to surpass 500 career home runs. In 1951, he was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Ott died from injuries he sustained in a car accident in 1958 at the age of 49. New Orleans is known for its jazz music, and one of the jazz musicians who rests here in Metairie is Pete Fountain. He was a clarinet player whose performances around the world made him an ambassador for the music of New Orleans. He played for the Lawrence Welk Orchestra, but left when he was not allowed to jazz up some of the music. Back in New Orleans, he played with the Dukes of Dixieland and became a staple in the French Quarter. And for Mardi Gras, Fountain led the Half-Fast Marching Club, one of the best-known marching units in the parade. He died of heart failure at the age of 76. For our last stop of the day, we'll make our way into the All Saints Mausoleum and up to the second floor. One of Pete Fountain's contemporaries, a man with whom he sometimes performed and shared a friendly rivalry, was another New Orleans jazz legend, Al Hirt. Nicknamed Jumbo, he was considered one of the greatest trumpet players in the world. He's remembered for his million-selling recording of Java, which earned him a Grammy, and later inspired Jim Henson's Java Muppets. His virtuosity on the trumpet can be heard in his performance of Flight of the Bumblebee as the theme for the Green Hornet. Al Hirt died of liver failure at the age of 76, and was inurned here with a tiny trumpet. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.